This video is going to be a overview of the basic tools in Adobe Illustrator and getting started with Illustrator. So once you have it opening, you are going to go to Create New. And just for today's demo, we're going to go to Print up at the top here, Letter. We want to change this to inches so that we are in the units that we know. And I'm going to go ahead and put this named as Practice and change the orientation to landscape. So the orientation is which way if we think of it as a piece of paper, which way it'd be rotated. Portrait is up and down, vertical, and landscape is horizontal, side to side. So this is nice when we're just practicing because it helps us fill the screen as we're working. And I'm going to hit Create. So this gets us our first screen. We want to make sure that we're in Essentials Classic up here in the top right. You can always, it'll default to Essentials the first time you open it, but we want to use Essentials Classic. And if you ever lose any of your toolbars or your panels, get rid of that. You can always go back here and go to Reset Essentials Classic. This is your toolbar here on the left. These are your menus at the top. This is the control bar, and these are your panels. So to get started, I want to show you just some basic shapes. So this is your rectangle tool. You'll notice whenever I hover over anything, it shows me the tool. And then I'm going to click and drag. I'm going to click and drag to make a rectangle. You'll see that it defaulted to have a black outline, which we call stroke, and a white fill. And I know it's white because this is white here and here and here. It's in a lot of places. If I wanted to change that color, I can click here and change it there to some of the defaults. You'll notice it's also changing here and here. There's a lot of places to get color. I can double click on this icon and it'll bring me a color picker where I can scroll around in the spectrum. I can go a little darker, and it's cool because it shows you here kind of where you were started and what you're at now. And when I expand this, it shows me my kind of default swatches, which are also over here on the panels. The third one down is swatches. And this will expand, so when you have more in here, you can kind of find all of them there. At the bottom left here, there's a little bookshelf icon button. That's your libraries for your swatches. And there's a lot of cool stuff in here. If you pick any of these, it'll pop up in a new window. I'm going to go to Color Properties and Bright. And you'll see it gives me this new little window. I like to have these open when I'm working to help me find colors. You can expand the box. And then down here there's little kind of page turners to go to the next library. It's just a nice way to kind of have colors already organized for you. And there's a lot of cool examples in here to explore. There's also the color panel here. It defaults to this smaller window. If you go to the little stacked lines and do show options, it'll expand and give you mixers. You can add more black. K is black, Y is yellow, M is magenta, C is cyan. And this will let you mix the colors to get something interesting. And you'll notice that all of these swatches, there's a little white box with a red line through it. And those are everywhere. And that means none. So this right here is our stroke. And you'll see it's here as well and here. If I click on it in the front and I can change it, you might not be able to see it right now, but if I make it thicker, you'll see that's the line around the shape. If I don't want anything visible, I can click that none and it goes away. Now if I want to adjust this shape, I have to use my selection tool. And I can click on the handles, these little anchor point handles, and move it around. Let's say I have my most perfect, favorite ever rectangle, and I want it to stay this way forever, but I want it bigger. If I hold Shift and click and drag, it will keep it in proportion as I'm scaling it up and down. If I want to start with a perfect square, I went back to my rectangle tool. I'm going to hold Shift while I click and drag, and that's going to keep it totally square for me. I'm going to go back to my selection tool, select my rectangle, and I want to rotate it. So if I go right outside that corner, you'll see I can click and drag and rotate my shape. Another cool thing is if I click and drag while I'm rotating and hold shift, it'll kind of rotate to those basic angles where it like snaps to them. So it kind of jumps to those basic angles. So that's kind of fun. I'll delete these. Also in my shapes, if I hold it down, it pops up and we get all these other ones. The ellipse tool is our basic kind of circle oval shape. Again, if I hold shift, I'll get a perfect circle. And I can move them around. I can change the shape of them. If I want to keep them in proportion, I hold shift as I'm dragging. And you'll see there's a bunch of other ones in here that you can kind of play with, and we'll show more of those later. If you just click, you'll notice you get this little box and it tells you, it can give you different information and sizes. If you want to just freeform it, just click and drag and use your selection tool to move things around. You'll notice when you hover over any tools that in the parentheses is a letter. That letter or that key is going to be the hotkey. So if I'm in my ellipse tool and I'm drawing ellipses, but then I want to move it, I can hotkey to the selection tool by just clicking V on my keyboard. So I don't have to go back to that toolbar and move things around as much. To start working with your shapes in more interesting ways, there's a lot you can do. You can apply gradients to them. And you'll notice right now, if I click this to apply the gradient, my stroke is in the front. So that would just put it on there. But if I click on the fill and put that fill in front, whatever's in front is what's going to be applied. I'm going to click that gradient. And I can change the slider to affect kind of where that gradient's going. I can double click the slider and give it colors. The little diamond here, that is affecting the kind of the spread of the gradient, that smoothness of it between the two colors. If I click underneath here when that little plus sign pops up, that'll give me more gradient sliders so I could add more colors to them. If I decide that was too much and I want to delete it, I can just select it and hit the little garbage can. And then once I have the gradient applied to a shape, I can go here to the gradient tool and freeform kind of draw on it where it starts and where it goes. In the gradient panel, there's lots of options and I recommend just playing with it. Right now we're in a linear gradient, but if we go to a radial gradient, then it goes from the center and you can move it around. You can adjust the size of it, the shape of it, and do some really beautiful work. There's also the freeform gradient, which is a newer addition. It takes a minute to load, and that lets you go in there and really kind of draw a bunch of them on there. It's kind of being funky right now. And you have to go in there and really play with the colors. I'm double clicking, and it lets you get some really cool stuff going. What's nice about gradients is that you can layer shapes with them. Let me get that out of here for a second. So if I take this one and I want to put it in front of the other circle, so to change the order of something, just right click on the shape, arrange, and then you can bring to front, bring forward, send it back, and so on. I'm going to put this in front of my other circle, and then I'm going to change the opacity. Opacity is the opposite of transparency. So right now we're at 100% opacity, which means it's not transparent. I can't see through it. But if I lessen that, it starts to be more see-through. I'm going to make it smaller. And I can layer it with my other shape. And that starts to be a way that you can really start working with making things look like they have shadows and highlights and dimension to them.